Tsongas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses. Generation after generation of Americans has endorsed the idea that our public lands and waters should be managed for the benefit of all Americans, despite the fact that many of those public lands are necessarily resident in particular states, so managed for all Americans to support a wide range of activities. These multiple uses include recreation activities such as hunting, hiking, and camping, along with responsible resource extraction and economic development, fishing, grazing, timber harvesting, and mining. Unlike state lands, which are often managed to maximize profits, public lands, the lands that belong to all Americans, do not exist for the sole purpose of generating revenue. I want to highlight the words of Pope Francis, who recently met with oil industry executives at the Vatican, as he said, quote, "The need for greater and more readily available supplies of energy to operate machinery cannot be met at the cost of polluting the air we breathe. The need to expand spaces for human activities cannot be met in ways that would seriously endanger our own existence or that of other living species on Earth." So he's also speaking to the environmental values of how we protect our public lands. We must work, and this is not his words, we must work to find a balance between competing interests on our federal lands and waters, which this legislation clearly fails to do, by creating a presumption in favor of oil and gas development over all other economic interests and national values. Mayor Cahoon, my questions are for you. You're clearly a community whose the economics of your community are clearly dependent upon tourism and fishing, and are put at risk by the potential risks of offshore drilling. Should there be a spill, which one of our witnesses has today referenced, that there are risks associated with offshore drilling. So I'm just curious from your point of view, and it's in part reiterating what you've already said. What are the risks that offshore drilling would pose to your economy that is so dependent on tourism and fishing?
There are really two risks for our community. The first arises from testing. We have a very significant commercial and recreational fishing industry in our area. Many of our tourists come for recreational fishing to go offshore to the Gulf Stream. Any activity that changes the behavior of the commercial fish or of those sport fish would put those industries at some risk, and especially our neighboring communities. The Wanchese area that is a historic fishing community would suffer significantly. The second risk is from a spill. The damage that would do to the fishing areas, the shell fishing areas, would be very significant. For us, though, we think of a spill on the beach and what that would mean. Our areas, I've always said that if you can run a business on the Outer Banks, you're one of the best business people in the world, because we have tourists for about four or 5 months out of the year, and our businesses make enough to get by, and we make a living that way. And if there's a spill and we shut down in one of those summers, people really will lose everything, and that's really why this cuts across all the lines for us, and is a very simple decision that we just can't withstand that risk.
So you clearly don't need offshore drilling to protect the long-term economic stability of your community. Yours is rooted in very different industries that are dependent on a very different scenario.
We do not. Our county is a $1.1 billion tourist industry right now today, and we don't need the oil, and we would put that substantial business at risk.
I thank you for your testimony. The challenge we have here is to balance competing interests, serious economic interests that benefit different communities in different ways, and this legislation clearly creates a presumption in favor of oil and gas drilling at the expense of other economic interests, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlewoman. The gentleman